Sex, scandal and public life. The former Deputy PM Barnaby Joyce and the ex-Labor MP Emma Husar sit on different sides of the political divide. Tonight they've come together to talk about when politics gets personal. Welcome to Q&A. Hey there, I'm here with high school student Sophie Watson, who's got our first question tonight. Answering all of your questions, the Nationals MP Barnaby Joyce, author and feminist Jane Caro. In Perth, former Labor MP Emma Husar, independent member for Indi Helen Haines, and later in the program we'll be joined live from the Netherlands by historian and author Rutger Bregman. His new book Humankind argues that most of us, underneath all the bad behaviour, are actually pretty decent. Please make all of them feel welcome. Sophie, your question.
As a young female, how do I learn to lead from politicians when we continually see topics of misconduct occurring in our parliament?
And before we go to the panel, I think you were thinking about politics. How does all of this stuff shape what you want to do with your future?
It definitely has made me think over the last few weeks. Is it something I really want to be doing? I think we've seen a lot of misogynistic comments and issues surrounding women in parliament, and it really does make a young female wonder, is it really the right path for me, and what do I really want to do? Yeah.
OK. Emma Husar, I want to start this off with you. How do you respond to that?
Sophie, thanks for the question. Certainly after the treatment that I received 2 years ago at the hands of the media and the misogynistic forces of the Labor Party, I had lots of young women reach out to me, including a niece that was studying to be in politics, was studying to go down that path, who just said, I just can't do this, why would I? I was asked by Lee Sales at the time, which was 2 years ago, if I would encourage women to come into politics. And certainly after the treatment that I was subject to, and certainly what we've seen over the last week play out, women are held to a completely different set of standards. We're told by the completely different set of ways in which the media has handled what was aired on Four Corners, and obviously Barnaby's case as well, is that women will be judged by a different set of standards. They will be told to abide by a different set of rules than the men. And I think for young women and for all women that is a completely disappointing position to be in. It's 2020, and whilst we still march forward and make some pathways for equality, we still have a massive way to go. Sophie, if you were my daughter, and I do have two, I certainly wouldn't encourage you to do anything I wouldn't encourage my own daughters to do. And after what I went through, it's certainly not something that I would willingly push them into. And as disappointing as that is, because women need to be there, we need to be at those decision-making tables, it's disappointing. But if the Liberal Party are saying that these men, Alan Tudge, Barnaby, the Nationals and Christian Porter are meritorious selection, we've got a problem.
Emma, I'm just interested to know how you've watched the events of the last week and how you compare where you've ended up in life. You've moved to Western Australia with Barnaby, with Christian Porter, with Alan Tudge. Does it seem fair to you?
No. No, it's completely unjust. What I went through, I had media cameras that, parked out the front of my house for weeks on end. While I had young children inside, I was chased across my front lawn with a camera and a mic shoved in my face asking if I was a slut and if I was Sharon Stone. I moved out of my house for a period of weeks. I was the subject of loads and loads of ridicule and trolling and horrendous threats and intimidation online. And then, of course, moving to Perth was an option to leave that community behind, where I felt like I was in a fishbowl. Everybody was kind and generous to me, but lots of people would sort of want to rehash the story in the streets. So Monday's airing of that episode is completely traumatic because it goes back and it digs up all of that stuff that happened to me. But it is incredibly galling to watch these men continue in their jobs, continue to go forward and to lead our country when, you know, in Tudge's case, I guess he got caught with his pants down. Barnaby's is the same. The jury's still out on Porter, but mine was all over innuendo, and there was, you know, a man that was wielding that agenda because I'd fired him, a man who felt privileged, who felt like he was entitled to his job, even though he was underperforming, didn't get his way in Fair Work, didn't get his way when he tried to extort me. And then so went down the path of, you know, getting the media to be complicit in his actions, which, you know, has had lasting ramifications on my life, and I've not worked since. You know, I'm probably not ready to talk about the impact that it's had on my mental health at this point, but the toll it's taken has been immense, and I don't think that I would want anyone to go through it, so I'm certainly not wishing that on those men, but certainly asking, what the hell is this? You know, we can't put a woman out there and hang her out to dry on rumour and innuendo when we've got behaviour that is clearly outside at least some standard of basic integrity going on while we allow this to happen to a woman.
Barnaby, is there a different set of standards for a man and a woman here?
Well, first of all, I'm sort of disappointed with Emma pointing her invective at me. I've done nothing but support Emma in what happened to her. I don't know anything about Emma's life, and Emma most certainly doesn't know anything about mine. So what I could say is I don't know about the personal issues surrounding Emma. I think she was treated incredibly poorly.
But you didn't call that out at the time, Barnaby. Like, I remember your party and the government of the day weaponising what I was going through and making it worse. Like, Emma, it's fine to sit here now and say that, you know, you're apologetic, but
no, I'm not
if you don't call it out as it goes through.
You have to look to your own side, and I did actually support you. You have to look to your own side, Emma, and what they said. And I completely find what they said about you from your own side appalling. Now, Emma, I don't want to end up in a debate with you. I think we should be debating the issues. I think this is an issue where I'm probably different to you, Emma, in that I'll accept that I did something that was wrong, I would say morally wrong, in that my marriage breaking down, but that is not a judgment for another politician. If it's illegal, it's a judgment for the police. If it's something else, it's a judgment for a priest or a pastor, but it's not a judgment for another politician. I've always tried to state that people will talk about later on power imbalance, and for me, I think it's one of age, agency and consent, and we've got to accept that the biggest one there is agency, and that's the capacity for you to say no, or the capacity for another person to say no, and for a capacity for them to mean it, and for a capacity for them not to be badgered on it. And if you cross that bridge of age, agency and consent, then it's not the job of another politician or a person who's not the police or some sort of moral guidance counsellor to be in judgment of you. Now, I'm not in judgment of you, Emma. I do find it a little bit galling that you open your sort of narration with one of sort of the meritorious selection of myself, because I most certainly never, ever did that to you.
Barnaby, is it clear to you why you lost your job as Deputy Prime Minister whilst almost simultaneously Christian Porter was promoted? Because that's the question that has been raised after last week's appearance by Malcolm Turnbull here and on Four Corners.
That's a very fair question, and I believe that I do not want anybody flushed down the toilet like I or Vicky was flushed down the toilet. Emma just said that she had to was traced across the lawn. I was locked in my house. I was the front page, not for days, for I'd say for months, in one part or another. I had to have my dinner. Just wait, Emma. I had to have my wait, Emma.
Sure.
I had to have my dinner put through the back fence, literally pushed through a fence, so we could eat in our house. And I don't want anybody to be treated like that again. I don't want Emma to be treated like that. I don't want Christian to be treated like that. I don't want Alan to be treated like that. I don't want any other human being to be treated like that, because it's outrageous. And but the thing is, I wasn't supported by the Prime Minister. Alan and Christian were
deserve
supported
to be
by...
treated. You didn't deserve to be treated in any other way. This comes down to a question of
that's
integrity.
a really value judgment, Emma. Why do you say that I deserve to be treated like that? I don't want to know why you or shouldn't be treated like that. I think you shouldn't. But why would you say, Emma, that you come out there and say you deserve to be treated like that?
We're talking about something entirely different, Barnaby. You know, in your case, you know, it goes to the question of integrity. You went to your electorate with Natalie and the girls on your call flutes, and you know, you campaigned on family values.
I didn't actually, Emma. That you're wrong there. At my last election, I was absolutely Natalie and the girls who I love dearly were not with me. So you're wrong on that one. I think it's really, I'm really quite disappointed, Emma, that you would say that that I deserve to be. I'm out here defending
okay.
you.
You're allowed to be disappointed. I'm disappointed in your behaviour, and it goes to a point of integrity, Barnaby, and it's different. So you and Alan and Christian Porter, there are witnesses that have come forward, and they're investigated. There is absolutely no question of doubt that you have acted with, you know, maybe a lack of integrity or a lack of judgment.
Okay,
you were married at the time, that's fine.
No,
but then
Emma,
we come
it's
over
really
to
important.
this...
It's really important that you point out exactly what you mean by that, because yes,
I will if you let me finish.
My marriage broke down, and I just want to know where your issue is with that.
I think I'd like to bring in Helen Haines at this point in time, because you're also a serving politician. You're relatively new in the Parliament. If we just reflect on the individuals that have been sort of named, identified recently, but also Barnaby and Emma, is it clear to you why Alan Tudge and Christian Porter are still in their positions, still have their portfolios? Barnaby is no longer the Deputy Prime Minister and Emma's not even in Parliament. Is there a clear standard that is being applied to all of these cases to test the claims and to make a decision on the merits of those claims?
Hamish, I want to bring it right back to Sophie, who raised this question, and I can see her shaking her head at the interchange here and at the hurt, at the dismay, at the bad blood. And it's all of those things that dissuade young women from entering politics. And Emma's story is horrendous. And I could see you listening to this thinking, oh, well, there it is, my decision's made. Hamish, you make the point about a set of standards. There is no code of conduct or set of standards that parliamentarians sign on to when they enter Parliament. I was really shocked by that. I've spent nearly 40 years in the workforce before I entered Parliament, and pretty much every other workforce I've been in, there's been a code of conduct and a set of standards by which you need to measure yourself against. There's also been clear mechanisms, if you stray from that, how that's handled. And this is what I see as missing in this. I think I don't think we need a prescriptive set of what we can and cannot do. We need a fundamental set of values and principles which that we are measured against. And then there are universal consequences, which is what Emma's pointing out here, is that the consequences aren't universal and many of them are gendered. I want to say to you, Sophie, that I look at you and I can hear the intelligence in your voice and the interest that you have to engage in politics. And I want to see a politic whereby women thrive. I think we need to be held to very high levels of account. I truly do. It's a difficult job to be a Member of Parliament, and Emma and Barnaby have had their lives played out in the media. That's been really ugly and awful and damaging. But I think if we had a parliamentary set of standards and a code, and I've introduced such a bill to the Parliament on the 26th of October, with a Parliamentary Standards Commissioner that goes with it, someone that can investigate and do something about this outside of trial by media.
Jane Caro.
Sophie, you have to go into politics. I'm sorry. You don't have a choice here. You have to. Because the only way we're going to change this is by having more women in Parliament, by having more women at the decision-making table. The reason that men get away with this behaviour, and I'm not going to name any names or point any fingers at anyone in particular, is because it is a boys' club. And we do not have enough women in power making these decisions and changing the culture. Because when we get more diverse people in politics, that's the way culture will change. So I'm sorry, Sophie, you put your hand up in public, and I'm here to tell you, however painful it may be, You have to do it. Every woman who has faced up to the dangers, the risks, the difficulties, the insults, the jibes, the things that happen. I mean, I was absolutely devastated today to hear that Rochelle Miller, who was the brave whistleblower in the Four Corners, turned up to the new job she thought she had today to be told that they were reconsidering her employment because of her media appearances. This is the boys circling the wagons. This is how it works. This is how the women who speak up are silenced, and women watch it and they shut up too. And that's why it goes on and it goes on. And the problem is with agency is if you're a young woman in any corporate or political situation and a man with power puts the hard word on you, I can tell you exactly what goes through your head. You don't want to do it. But if you say, I don't want to do it, he's going to queer your pitch for the rest of your working life. So you have to find a way to say to him, do that dance, you know, where you don't do what he wants you to do, but you help him to save face, because otherwise you know he will punish you for what you do. And with this will not change until we have as many women in positions of power as we have men, and as many mediocre women in positions of power as we have mediocre men. They don't need to be exceptional. The men aren't.
I completely agree with Jane. I completely agree with Jane. So there you go. If you feel that you in agency that you don't have a capacity to say go away, Sophie, or stop that, or if they're badgering and they persist, you should be able to call in the cavalry and take them to task. Absolutely, 100%. But Sophie, my daughter's actually involved with politics, and I had dinner with her tonight. I reckon it's an incredible profession, an incredible service to the public. But what I don't want is, if you've ever read George Orwell's 1984, well, you should. It's a brilliant book. Okay, if you read about Winston and Julia, you don't want the state to be telling Winston and Julia how to live. It's Winston and Julia's choice.
That's a long
how to live. Well, it's not really, Jane.
Has anyone ever called in the cavalry, as you describe it, on you? Has that ever happened to you?
I think that most people have. Look, well, first of all, in a condition of agency, I think that my office staff were always incredibly happy. I had one of the longest contingency of people who stayed with me. In fact, even right now in my office, I've got if you add up all the years I've lived within service in the public service and in my office, it's one of the greatest in Australia. I mean, it's you know, I always try to make sure that I had chain of command, and my discussions were with my chief of staff, and the chief of staff disseminated that to other staff. And people look at something and they try to. I don't know how they get it. Like, I've got 2 kids, you know. This wasn't some sort of flippant, off-the-cuff thing. It was, you know, and people say, oh, there was something evil. There was something, adversarial. There was something that was exploitive. Look, if it was exploitive, we would have broken up.
Okay,
we weren't.
That leads us to our next question.
No one can accept that. No one wants to accept that. They just don't want to accept it.
I want to take our next question on that point. It's from Sue Langston.
Is it wrong for a boss to have sex with an employee, given the power differentials and the potential for problems? Even if it's mutual attraction, should the boss be expected to say no?
Barnaby?
I wonder who that was directed to. The answer is no. And this is where I'm way out of line with corporate Australia. And I go back to that Orwellian theory. You know, Julia and Winston are not to be determined whether they like each other by the state. It's part of my belief. If Julia feels she's being exploited by Winston, badgered by Winston, sure, take Winston to court. But you can't have the state as the determinant of whether 2 people like each other or not. Where are we going to stop? If you want to do that, we're going to a sexuality. Where do you want to stop this? And I just think that I just believe in the freedom of the individual to do as their heart desires.
Shouldn't women have the freedom to go to work without having to worry about their boss hitting on them?
I 100% agree with you. And but human beings, but what human beings are, the moment someone says, no, I'm not interested, don't do that, that's it. that's where it stops.
But
you know,
did.
but if and that
what's
that
up
is
with
the
Barnaby's argument,
differentiation.
Jane?
Well, basically, the problem is that by and large in our society to this day, most bosses are men and most of the employees and subordinates who would be in this situation are women. Not all of them, but most of them. And the problem with that is freedom is really hard to have if the power between the two people who are in the relationship is not equal.
Then they don't have agency.
Exactly. And so the problem with bosses sleeping with their employees is, and we've seen it time and time again in corporate life, in politics, in everything you can think of.
And it'll be there forever.
It's always the woman who ends up trashed. I mean, you know, here's Emma, hasn't worked since she left. Here's Rochelle, losing the job she thought she had. The problem is that the woman, if the love doesn't work out, and most loves don't, it's lovely that yours did, but most don't, particularly in that situation, then unfortunately it seems to be always the woman that pays the price. I've heard so often people say, she's going to ruin his career. I'm yet to see many men whose careers have actually been ruined. I've seen a hell of a lot of women who've had to leave the country, who've had to get other jobs, whose whole working life and ambition has been ruined.
But Jane, I agree with you, and that's wrong. Right?
Yeah, but
that's wrong.
unfortunately...
But you can't then say, then the ipso facto, we can never, that human beings from this point forward will act differently
no one's
to what they
actually
did in Aztec temples. As long as you've got two people who are attracted to you...
No one's actually trying to say that from this point on, no human beings are ever allowed to be attracted to each other. But I think that if a boss and an employee find themselves in that situation, it is beholden to the boss to, first of all, disclose this publicly to his employer or her employer, to make this clear and above board, and to make sure that therefore, the organisation can take steps to change the dynamic. Because one of the other problems that happen if you've got a romance in an office situation is other people working around who don't know who to talk, who's getting favours, who's getting promoted over someone else, who's getting opportunities. It's very messy in the work.
I think this is the point, isn't it? It's not about making a moral judgment.
No.
This is about a workplace. And this is about workplace standards. And I think the point Jane makes is a very reasonable one. Whichever way you look at it, things can go awry in such a situation. And we need to create a workplace whereby we actually get on with the job that we're meant to be doing. And for every second that we talk about this, we're not actually doing the work that the Australian people want us to do in the Parliament, and that really disturbs me. So I think we do need some structural mechanisms to make sure that we have, a safe workplace. That's fundamental. There should never be sexual harassment that goes unchecked. We absolutely need to have a process for that. But likewise, if, as you say, Barnaby, there is mutual attraction, these things happen, then make the right steps.
Yeah, Hugh Marks, the boss of Nine, who has stepped down this weekend, did he do the right thing? Is in a relationship with a former colleague. She's left the business, as it's been reported. There's no question about harassment or consent or any of those sorts of things. He's left the job because of that relationship. Is that what he needed to do?
I think we're seeing corporate Australia are going to start to take the lead on this kind of behaviour. And I think that in the case with our parliamentarians and the males that have been on Four Corners and what have you, they've been married. Men and women will fall in love at work. You know, if you go and survey half the country and ask people where they met, by and large, a lot of people meet in the workplace. Catherine Lumby had a really good article this week talking about what should happen when you do find yourself in that situation. I think when we talk about the men in politics that that have been in the media this week, they are married men. So there is a different set of integrity and a different set of eyes that we're looking at those relationships with. When it comes to bosses and that power imbalance, it is critical that those things are managed and managed appropriately. Hugh Marks stepped down, but what I did notice from that reporting, again, which we talked about at the beginning of the show, is the way Alexis was, a massive photograph in the paper, her photo, adorned 3/4 of that page, and his headshot was the only thing that we saw of him. So again, we're saying, here's this woman, she's had this relationship, and we're going to hold her out as the responsible one. And it was the same in Vicky's case, who I have a lot of admiration for. Where that photo by the Daily Telegraph of her being pregnant, as though this was all her responsibility. So we're seeing You know, 2 years ago when that came out, Vicky's held up as the person who should be, you know, accountable for this, and then the same on the weekend with the Hugh Marks case. I think that. And I said as much as this in the opinion piece that I wrote last week. We're going to start to see other areas of Australia, the NRL, dare I say it, have a better code of conduct than what we hold our nation's leaders to, and that is really, really disappointing.
Can I just say, in promulgating your argument, you sort of fall over in the first section of your thesis. That is, you say that...
Of course I do.
Just wait up, Emma. Just when you say that there must be a disclosure, as Helen said, there was inferred in there that the guy needs to disclose it. What about the woman's right to say whether she wants it disclosed or not? We seem to have completely ignored that bit.
In the workplace, I think it has to be disclosed.
So who discloses it?
Who's the person with the power.
So the boss has to disclose it?
Yeah, I think so.
Against the right of the woman whether she wants it disclosed?
Or that they have to work it out, or they have to...
Well, hang on, how do you do that?
They have to... Because it can't continue...
What right does a woman have?
What a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive.
You've got to answer the question. What right does a woman have?
I have to answer your question.
What right does a woman have to disclose it or not?
She can disclose it if she wants to or not,
Well,
but the boss...
If he discloses it, she's obviously disclosing for her, hasn't she?
Barnaby, you do need to let people answer your questions
if
you're going to ask them. So the answer to that is, if the boss is a boss and is employed in that position, they have a duty of care to their staff. So they actually have a responsibility both to the people they employ and to the people who employ them. That is their job.
So Jane, they disclose it over the woman's right to say, I don't want to disclose.
Or they say, or the relationship ends. Either we can be open and honest about this, or it ends.
Can you please answer to me, what is the woman's right to whether it's disclosed or not?
I'm going to pull you up there, Barnaby.
As an employee in an affair with her boss, he has a duty of care to his employer and his employees. It needs to be disclosed. She can disclose it too.
Just disclose it.
No.
OK, folks, we've got a guest standing by in the Netherlands. His name's Rutger Bregman. He's listening into this rather extraordinary conversation from a very long way away. What do you make of the discussion you're hearing tonight?
Well, it really makes me think about the power of shame. There's one really worrying phenomenon in modern politics that, you know, I often like to call survival of the shameless, where somehow the people who don't really feel shame anymore come out on top, and almost always, you know, they're men. If you think about human nature, it's really unique that we have this ability to feel shame. We're one of the only animals in the whole animal kingdom with the ability to blush, for example. But then if you think about our political leaders or our corporate leaders, well, you can't really imagine them blushing anymore. So, yeah, I think we really need to have this fundamental discussion about shame, because on the one hand, we see this toxic shaming of quite vulnerable people, and on the other hand, we see a whole political class who just can't be shamed anymore. You know, we can't even imagine them blushing anymore. So I think that's sort of the deeper question here.
OK,
I think in my case, sorry, just to go on what Rutger was saying, is that this slut shaming that I sued for and that Sarah Hanson-Young sued for in the same year in our workplaces is used to undermine women, and I agree that silence is the oxygen of shame. So when you can't speak up and when you can't go forward, and certainly over my career in the Labor Party, I took forward many complaints of being slut-shamed in public, in those public hallways, well before it even reached the front page. I took it to general secretaries, I took it to the leader of my caucus, I took it to the deputy opposition leader at the time, because I said this has to stop, it has to stop, it can't go on. All of this is rumour, it's innuendo, none of it's true, and there was nothing of which could be done. Now, two of those blokes that were involved in that shaming and in that undermining of me and my career have gone on to be promoted within the Labor Party, which is, you know, just an absurd way for our progressive party in this country to be treating the women that it so readily invites into, you know, take those seats at the table. And until we figure out how to do that, Rutger's right, we're going to have a cohort of people that are completely shameless, and it by and large seems to favour the fellas. But I will point out Michaelia Cash's absolute incredible slur in the Senate when she sort of, cast aspersions over every single woman that worked for the leader of the opposition at the time.
Okay.
So I think it's a really important distinction.
I want to take our next question. It comes from Monique Dixon.
Rutger Bregman talks about how we humans are actually full of altruism and cooperation during tough times and that we are fundamentally decent. But I question this whole logic because if you, to quote Rutger, zoom out and have a look at the world and the countries and populations most affected by COVID-19 and simultaneously which groups have suffered financially versus those that have been advantageous, does it not highlight that these eras of pandemics actually create more divide within society and between countries?
Rutger Bregman.
Well, there's certainly a lot of evidence for that. What my point here is that there's a lot of evidence that in times of crises, such as a pandemic, or also think of a natural disaster, for example, an earthquake or a tsunami, that people don't start looting and plundering. We're not deep down all selfish, but we actually start cooperating on a massive scale. Most of us, at least. I believe that most people are pretty decent, but power corrupts. That goes back to the earlier conversation. So yes, there is evidence of people, I don't know, in the first few months hoarding toilet paper and that kind of stuff. It's a bad thing. You shouldn't do that. But if we zoom out a little bit, then I think that we see that most people cooperated and were willing to quite radically adjust their lifestyle to stop the virus from spreading further. And that's the headline to me, this massive amount of cooperation.
But how then do you explain what's happened in the United States, where you've seen violence break out on the streets? You've seen really the democratic process falter, obviously not just because of COVID, but in this broader environment in which politics and society has not managed to get on top of a challenge like this?
Well, look, there's an old idea in Western culture that comes back again and again, which we call Veneer Theory. This notion that our civilization is only a thin layer, only a thin veneer, and that as soon as something happens, like a crisis or a pandemic or a disaster, that we reveal who we really are. That deep down people are just selfish. This is the ruling ideology of those at the top. It comes back again and again. Cynicism is their favorite, view of the world, because if people can't trust each other, then we need them. Then we need the kings and the queens and the career politicians and the CEOs to keep each other in check. And therefore, it's highly subversive to actually believe in other people and say, hey, wait a minute, we the people can actually change the world. And if you look, for example, at the US the past couple of months, the whole Black Lives Matter movement, this massive, it was the biggest protest in the history of the United States. People, the vast majority of them, peacefully protesting. I think that was a sign of hope. People basically saying, we can actually change this. So that is, I think, what you should focus on. Indeed, those at the top want you to be cynical about other people, because if you're cynical, then you need them. If we can actually trust each other, then we can move to a much more democratic, egalitarian society.
Emma, hope, optimism, everyone's fundamentally decent. Do you buy it?
I do. Look, I was incredibly naive when I went into Parliament, and I maintain a sense of hope, even though, what I've been through. I think that if we lose hope, then, we've lost purpose. There is a fraction and a fragment of society that will always look to exploit, where they think that they can get ahead, or whether they think they can beat somebody else at their own game, which will always exist. I had lots of conversations when I was the MP out in Lindsay with people who came to me with very firm and fast ideas about race, about migrants and about refugees. And by and large, what I found with engaging with those people and offering them a chance to be educated, or a different point of view, for example, that you could more often than not, switch that person around, or at least offer a different scenario. I think people are born generous. I think that, we're all shaped differently by our experiences, but education has a massive, massive role to play in making sure that we raise a society that is fair and just.
OK, let me take our next
Hamish,
question.
though, can I just comment? Monique, it was a really terrific question. And this year in Australia, we've seen two major crises. We've seen a bushfire crisis at the beginning of the year, and in my electorate, we were smashed by that bushfire in the northern part, and I saw incredible cooperation. We saw the regions and the cities coming together with generosity and sharing, and in COVID we've seen very similar wonderful scenes of people with shared food tables, you know, crochet clubs, goodness knows what else. We've all heard the stories. But I think what you're pointing to is that in a time of enormous crisis, it also illustrates the real fault lines in our society. And we know that our elderly population, that people who are struggling with their mental health, the loneliness that people felt, really exposed those who are the most vulnerable.
All right, let me take our next question. It's a video from Lee Bailey in Bombala, New South Wales.
Mr. Bregman, much like yourself, I have always believed in humankind being inherently good. I personally strive to live by virtues of kindness, compassion, and selflessness. Why is it, though, that our members of Parliament and other people who gravitate towards positions of power seem to lose track of their moral compass? In fact, it fails. Therefore fails the people. Why do you think this is, and how can we change this?
All right, before I go to Rutger, Barnaby, I can hear you in dismay at that question.
Yeah, because it's not right. And I said something more profane to you. But look,
OK, I could hear you swearing.
But look, that's Lee's view of the world. And this idea that everybody who goes into Parliament is some sort of monster is garbage. Going back to what Sophie said before, they're not. They're actually, no matter what side of the political fence they're on, they're ultimately driven by a sense of trying to make the world a better place. And generally what happens is when we see that they don't agree with our worldview, we think that they're somehow corrupt, wrong, insidious, and that is just incorrect. They mightn't have your view, but they're driven by their own views of where the world is going. When I see, and you see this in politics, when people first start, they're very tribal, rah, 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 you know, I'm right and everybody's wrong. And it's just like university or anywhere else. Later on, they say, well, I'm actually going to listen to the views of other people and I'm going to respect that they may have a different view. And that's this thing. I'm mates with people on the Labor side. I've been, I'm fairly close to people on the Green side and everywhere in between. It's right down to One Nation side. At the end of the day, you just accept that different people have different views and you respect that. And that's what an egalitarian democracy does, you know. And going back before, what was said before, that, you know, inherent selfishness, that's just an innate trait of how human life is. That's why we've got every religion, whether it's Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, they all say you have to rise above the self. You have to rise above the self. So this is not unique. It's going to be with us in the past, it's with us. It was with us in the past, it's with us now, and be with us in the future. I mean, it's just that an inherent challenge of being human.
Rutger, this was a question for you about people attaining power and losing track of their moral compass. Do you think that happens?
Mm-hmm. Well, it obviously doesn't happen to all politicians, and obviously there are a huge amount of politicians out there, you know, who really have ideals that they want to fight for. And yeah, we don't need to make simplistic generalizations here. But as I said, it is very worrying if you look at many modern democracies, whether it's Australia or the US or, you know, Bolsonaro in Brazil or Boris Johnson in the UK. There do seem to be quite a few really powerful men who just can't be shamed anymore.
Yeah, but
so how do you explain that? Well, you have to go deep into psychology and look at the evidence we have that power is a really corruptive force.
It's a banal...
There's actually neurological research that people who are under the influence of power, you know, they don't really feel empathy anymore. They find it hard to connect with other people. And somehow we have a system that selects these kind of people to get
Barack Obama has lost his sense of moral compass, has he?
No, he didn't say
Has Barack Obama... No, all politicians, we're all bad, we're all evil people. So Barack Obama has lost his sense of...
You're verbling him.
No, I'm using an analogy to show how ridiculous the statement is, Jane.
No, he said, of course not all politicians.
Well, he can speak for himself.
That's how he started.
I just want to speak for him.
Yeah, but that's how he started, and he's right. The point about the politicians who rise to the top and become corrupted, because I think it is a huge risk. As soon as you have a lot of power, people are going to start to suck up to you. They're going to start to try to reflect you back to yourself at twice your natural size. So that becomes a temptation to believe that you know what is right. And we do have...
I agree with that.
We do have a
Jane,
crop of particular
Jane,
politicians...
I agree with what you say there.
That's really nice, Barnaby.
Be quiet.
But yeah, it's my turn to talk.
Thank you. There's a big difference between temptation and reality.
I think there's also another element to this, and that's what other external forces are at play. One of the problems I think we have in this nation when we think about corruption, or we think about being corrupted, or our intentions being influenced, is political donations, for example.
Yes.
You know, we don't have transparency around political donations. That really disturbs me. I think it should disturb every Australian. I think we need much stronger legislation around that. I think we need to be asking the question, who is actually in the ear of our politicians? And I think as voters, each and every one of you, when you're thinking about how you're going to cast your vote, is to think about who is the person I'm voting for. They are my local representative. Who were they before they came to Parliament? Have they changed? Are they just the same? Or what else is going on with them? I think we each can ask that question and cast our vote accordingly. But likewise, I think we need to be very alive to what other influences, what other lobbyists, what other political donations are coming in and having an impact on the politicians that are meant to serve us all.
Absolutely right about political donations.
Let's take our next question. It comes from Musab Al-Salim in the studio.
Hello. My question is to Rutger, but I would love to hear everybody else's opinion. Are you optimistic? Do you believe that the current economic, political and corporate system would allow a new, fairer and more sustainable system to be born, or would it be just stillbirth?
Rutger.
You know, I'm not an optimist, but I'm not a pessimist either. To me, optimism sounds a little bit like complacency, where you say, you know, things will turn out to be all right, don't worry. The future will be rich and happy. But you don't have to be a pessimist either. I think you can be hopeful about the future. Hope is about the possibility of change, and it impels you to act. Now, again, if we zoom out a little bit, and if we look at what's been happening in the past 10 years, we've seen that ideas that used to be dismissed as unrealistic, unreasonable, crazy, you know, they've moved into the mainstream. Think about higher taxes on the rich, a universal basic income to completely eradicate poverty, a more activist role for the state to tackle the great threats of our time, such as climate change. I mean, 10 years ago, that was dismissed as lunacy. But now, if you read, I mean, in April, there was an editorial from the Financial Times, you know, not exactly a left-wing publication, but even they said that we need to think about all these things, higher taxes on the rich, a universal basic income. And I think that this year can be, you know, the shifting point where everything changes. Indeed, crises make you remember really important things. They lay bare what's really wrong with society. So, for example, we've learned this year who the real wealth creators are. Turns out that these so-called essential jobs, you know, you look at the lists that have been published around the globe and the hedge fund managers are not on there. You know, we're talking about teachers, nurses, care workers, you name it, who are doing the really important work. If they go on strike, we're in trouble.
That's right.
So I hope that this year could be a shifting year where we move into a new zeitgeist. And that's also what I see when I look at a new generation. You know, there's still an old political class in power, you know, who are 50 or 60 years old. They grew up in the era of the Cold War. And that's how they see the world in black and white. Like, they talk about capitalism versus communism, for example. But again, if we zoom out and if we look at the younger generation, at the millennials and Generation Z, here we have the most ethnically diverse, most progressive, most highly educated generation in the history of the world that looks at things very differently. You know, when they say, "Ooh, that's communism, that's socialism," we say whatever. You know, we just are more open to new ideas, and that really gives me hope. It doesn't make me an optimist, but it does give me hope.
Disagree.
I said at the start of COVID, and I made a tweet, so everyone's welcome to go back. I said, finally, you know, the world might understand and learn that we live in a society first and then an economy second. And certainly some decisions that have been made over the last, you know, nearly a year that we've been dealing with this, have really put forward and like Rutger said, you know, the list of professions that have topped that list of getting us through this crisis have not been, you know, CEOs on $1 million wages or politicians even. They've been the workers that have kept us all going, nurses, teachers and cleaners. I'm an eternal optimism, Masab, probably addicted, you know, to being optimistic. I think resilience is a muscle and it is something that we all need to flex more often. It's a shame that we don't teach how to be resilient to children through their school years, which is something that we assume happens. But I think that you know, moving forward, if we lose hope and lose our sense of optimism, but not to be naive about that either, that we're all in a bit of trouble. So I'd like to look at the Gretas and the AOCs and the Arderns of the world who are leading in the millennial and the Gen Z space to bring things to the decision-making tables and to the powers that be to change things as we go forward.
Are you optimistic, Helen Haines?
I'm a very hopeful person, and I think that distinction's a really important
What's
one,
the
as
difference?
Rutger pointed out. Sometimes optimism can be a little Pollyanna if you're not thinking about what the consequences may be on either side of an argument. But hope is about having a true belief and a true desire, actually, to solve a problem. And I think something we need to be doing a whole lot more in the body politic is around consensus building, around meeting people where they're at. It's something that I love about being a member of the crossbench, about being an independent. I often say to my colleagues in the National Party, who I sit very close to, you know, it's really easy to cross the floor when you're an independent.
Stone's throwing distance.
Because you look at legislation on its merits, you make a decision about it, you talk to people about it, you try to find which is the best way forward. I think the other thing about hope is that hope and trust go together really, really closely. And what we've been talking about very much at the beginning of this conversation tonight is an erosion of trust. And if we're really going to embrace bold, innovative new ideas, we need to trust in leadership. And I think very much we need to invest in young people. And if ever there's an opportunity, I think in the wake of this COVID crisis, we need to be doing some bold policy work around investing in young people. Maybe it's universal, free, early childhood education so that everyone gets at the starting gate of primary school on a level playing field. They're the kind of bold things that we should be doing. I'm hopeful that we can, but we must restore faith and trust in politics.
Very briefly, Jane and Barnaby. You go first, Jane.
OK. I don't know how optimistic I am at the moment. I'm seeing lots of people talking about this stuff, which I've heard for a very long time. What I'm watching is women sliding backwards rapidly. 86,000 less enrolments in 2020 for women and girls in universities. 400,000 women over 45 facing the very real possibility of being homeless. What I'm seeing is rights being removed. What I'm seeing is budgets that pay no attention to the stark poverty staring particularly older Australian women in the face. Yes, they're the nurses, the teachers, the parents, the carers, and what's their reward for doing that? The very real chance of poverty in their old age. I'm not hopeful, I'm angry. I'm furious. I'm beside myself with anger at the way we have treated my generation of women. They're the girls I went to school with, they're my neighbours, and they are eking out an existence on that appalling, punitive New Start or Job Seeker Now Alliance pictures being reduced. I can't watch the actions of our leaders and remain hopeful and optimistic. I am hopeful and optimistic about the attitudes of the public changing, but I'm afraid I am beside myself with fury about how we ignore 51% of the population still, people of colour, people with disability, and I'm sorry, investing in young people and in children in particular is incredibly important, but we've got to stop throwing old people away and warehousing them. And ageism is something that has come to the fore in COVID like nothing else I've ever seen. So I'm neither optimistic or pessimistic. I'm fired by fury.
OK, I think you've made that clear. Barnaby,
maintain the rage.
Very brief response, please.
Don't crap on the system that gave you the best sense of freedom since we all left the cave. Look at the fear in the eyes of the people of Hong Kong. Look at the premonition that's dawning
America.
on I was polite for you, please. Look at the premonition that was on that has to deal with Taiwan. Realise that democracy is a shrinking form of government in the globe, not an increasing form of government in the globe. For all our problems, we have delivered to Australia and to the rest of the world in a democratic system the greatest sense of freedoms that you have ever got in the history of humankind.
OK. Rutger Bregman, it's been great to have you part of this conversation tonight. We're going to say goodbye to you right now. Would you please thank Rutger Bregman? And a quick note before we take our next question. We are planning something a bit different for our final show of this extraordinary year, and we'd actually like to hear your story as part of it. How has 2020 changed you? Head to our website right now and upload a short video to help us tell your story as part of our telling of this crazy year. Our next question comes from Bree Smith.
I've got another question.
My question's for Barnaby Joyce. So growing up in St George, Queensland, I've seen the harsh effects of climate and mining on a rural landscape. How can you reconcile calling yourself and your party for the farmers while continuing to sell out current and future farming generations' interests to mining conglomerates?
OK, it's a very good question. Were you Dirranbandy or St George?
In between.
Right, yeah. OK, so look, the big thing is, what we've got a big problem is being compelled to give over private assets without payment. The big issue for us is if a community believes there's a benefit in an issue, the community should pay for it. It shouldn't just divest the individual of that asset. When your parents, if they're on the land, bought a block of land, they own the trees, they own the vegetation, it was part of what they had to borrow money from the bank to pay for. Now, if the people want that, if the government wants it, it should buy it back off them, not just take it off them without payment. That is the big issue. In a lot of these issues, it's about divestment of the individual of a private asset to be vested in the state without payment, which we inherently and absolutely explicitly disagree with, because we've got to pay back the money to the bank. You know, that's the issue. We have to pay back the money to the bank. And when you talk about mining companies...
Bree's shaking your head. What are you shaking your head at?
Do you think it's fair to take people's livelihoods just because you want to stick a couple of gas wells on their property?
But when the government comes out and says, you no longer own that, you no longer own this, you can't do that, you can't do this, that's precisely, Bree, what they're doing to us. That is precisely what they're doing to us. And that is the disconnect, Bree. It's the disconnect is, if you want something that basically divests me of an asset and divests my family of an asset, yet leaves the debt with the bank for me to pay and for the rates for me to pay, then I expect compensation. Now, if you have that discussion, Bree, you're going to get a lot different outcome to just walking in and saying, I, the government, now say that you no longer own that, I own that, but you're going to pay the rates, you're going to pay the bank back, you're going to pay the insurance, you're going to have to maintain it, but you no longer own it. We don't like that idea.
No, but we're talking about the Nationals Party here.
Well, why? It's got nothing to do with the Nationals. It's to do across the board. No, we're talking about the Nationals Party. Why are you advocating for fossil fuels when it's detrimental to farming as an industry? You're for the farmers. Well, but I've just...
We're not talking about paying back the banks.
But
we're talking about the land and you taking it away from people.
But what we're saying there is precisely what happens to people who own land, Bree. The government never pays them for the asset they stole off them.
What? Your government's doing that.
They steal the asset off them and they never pay them for it.
What? Are you serious?
Well, do you know about vegetation management laws and how they work, Bree? Because you live...
I'm aware.
OK, so what happens with vegetation management laws? What did the government do? We're not talking about
vegetation management laws. We're talking about mining and the Nationals Party. Why do you advocate for
coal? Let's just take the head out of this for a moment. Helen Haines, I want to bring you in on this conversation. You also represent a regional area. I suppose this goes to a question that we hear pretty regularly, and it's about whether or not it is actually in the interest of farmers to take the current position on climate change action that Australia takes. What do you hear from your community?
Look, what I hear from my community is that they are at the forefront of climate change. It's the farmers who are telling me that there's changes in when their crops are ready to harvest. It's our winemakers. We know that farmers have the most to lose by inaction on climate change. We know that the National Farmers Federation have now come on board with a net zero emissions target by 2050. But we also know that the most tremendous opportunity is sitting there right in front of us now in rural and regional Australia to fully embrace with a renewable energy boom that is coming faster than a rocket. In Barnaby's electorate alone, $13 billion of new funding has been attracted by the New South Wales government into the renewable energy zone. What I want to see is that rural and regional Australia finally have the opportunity to harness this as the greatest new income stream that they've ever seen before. I've put out something called the Local Power Plan. Go to the website, localpowerplan.com, jump on board. In fact, Barnaby, I'm going to introduce a private member's bill to Parliament before the year is out to establish the Australian Local Power Agency. I would like you to second that bill.
Endorsed by Helen Haines, member for Indi, Commonwealth Government, Canberra.
Because in rural and regional Australia, what Bree's talking about is things being done to us rather than things being done with us. I know right across Australia right now, if we embraced a policy that enabled rural and regional Australians to share in this energy boom, to have shares in major projects like the Sapphire project in northern New South Wales, who were enabled by good public policy to set up microgrids in small towns, to give themselves energy security in a crisis.
I'm going to cut you a deal on national television. I'm going to cut you a deal on national television.
Cut her off on national television?
No, he's going to cut me a deal. I've put the challenge out to Barnaby right tonight.
If you talk about compensation for farmers for what has been taken off them without payment, I'm absolutely all eyes and ears. Let's talk about it.
I'm not talking about that at all. What I'm talking about is the incredible opportunity that rural and regional Australia have right now, if we've got the right policy levers to enable us to share in the renewable energy boom. Localpower.com, get on board and have a look. And Barnaby, I really would love to talk to you more about it.
I will move an amendment to make sure that you pay farmers for what was stolen off them without payment.
Ridiculous. Are you talking about trees?
Yeah, I'm talking about trees and vegetation.
I didn't know what the hell you were talking about. Because I'm a farmer and I've never felt remotely like I've had anything stolen off me. I don't mind managing my trees and my grass and my waterways in a way that maintains the environment so that it stays clean, it stays productive.
Do you believe you should own them or not?
I do own them.
No,
but I'm prepared to...
No, there's a whole range of caveats.
Do you know what I don't own? I don't own anything under this much soil. The mining industry can take that from me any time they like and pay me, as far as I know, nothing.
No, you're incorrect in believing that you own your vegetation because you only own it in the prescribed belief of where the government has the caveats of what you can and cannot do. And that was being imposed on you without payment.
Well, you know,
I reckon we might
really
leave Jane and Barnaby to talk about farm management in the green room.
Can I say climate change worries me a lot more than the government having a caveat over some trees.
OK, that is about all we've got time for tonight. Would you please thank our wonderful and lively panel, Barnaby Joyce, Jane Caro, Emma Husar and Helen Haines. Please put your hands together. And thanks to those of you at home and for those of you here in the studio for sharing your questions. And to those of you streaming us live on iView. Well, I'm really excited to tell you that next week we're actually doing what we love most. We're getting back out on the road, believe it or not, in 2020. We'll be live in Western Sydney and we'd love you to join us at the Q Theatre in Penrith. We're leaving you tonight with a performance from Lime Cordiale. Here they are performing Reality Check, Please.
Goes out to Barnaby.
Stressing out on the good life and feeding without delay, making accusations, but you're anxious every day. Need a break from your busy schedule of living 5 stars where you stay. You're making a stand, but not standing up yet. You're strong and of course you're a darling. You're smart and you're well read. You fight for what you think's right, but only make a difference in your head. You need a break from your addiction. Don't be plugged in until you're dead. You're making a stand, but not standing up. You have no plans to make plans. You have no plans that don't directly affect you. You have no plans to make plans. You have no plans that don't directly affect you. You cannot alter your good life. Feel better about yourself by dwelling on frustrations, just by saying that we need to help. You need a break, but you're not broken. It's like a band-aid when you help. You're making a style, but not standing up yet. Paint pictures of perfect people to model figure you've conjured up. Strut around with such conviction, despite what you said haven't yet done enough. Somewhere along the way there, you lost track of what life's about. You're making a style, but not standing up. Yeah. You have no plan.